I recently took a 5-month trip to Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. I didn't bring a computer with me. I was often off the grid, didn't have internet access or telephone access. And a lot of the time, a lot of different periods of time, I was alone. Alone out in nature, no people around, just me and trees or hot springs, wild animals, birds, glaciers. And I saw again and again when I was out there, just walking and walking and walking, and sometimes just sitting, being alone with myself, soaking in a hot spring perhaps, with no one around. I saw that I liked to be alone, and I saw that it brought me comfort and pleasure. And it's interesting because I haven't always been that way. When I was a kid, yes, I was able to be alone, but it was also just because I was escaping the painful world of my family system. Didn't always have friends. School was often hell and tormenting, and the kids were often nasty and I didn't fit in. And being alone in nature was just a place where I could breathe and just not be watched and feel safe. But it wasn't like what it is now for me. It's something different now. I was recently talking about this with a friend, about how I noticed I just sometimes have this wonderful, pleasurable feeling of being alone, out in the world, out in nature, in places that nobody goes, beyond the reach of phone service and internet and people, humanity, anything. That I'm actually not alone, because I am with some part of me that I wasn't allowed to be with as a kid. That part had to get pushed down and buried. It was buried under terror and fear and trauma. If I had been connected or more connected with that part of me would have spoke out, and it would have probably gotten me killed in my family system. I remember when it did speak out, that true part of me. It's like, my father hated me. My mother was terribly threatened by me. I didn't get that part of me reflected back. I didn't have friends who understood that. My school system, my teachers, nobody reflected that beautiful side of me back. And so I had to push it down and hide it. Now, through so many years and decades of healing my trauma, especially of grieving, of getting away from these traumatizing people, building myself a much safer, more loving life, in my own personal life with myself, in my relationship with me, but in my allies around me. That true, deep part of me has been allowed to come out, develop, express himself, to be me. And I love to be alone with me now. Now, don't get me wrong. I love to be with people. I love to be with people with whom I share common values. I love to learn from people, to listen to them, to laugh with them, to cry with them sometimes. I love friends. I loved being a therapist. I spent all my day in intense emotional interaction with others. People who, for the most part, I really grew to love. They became like family to me, like almost like, even though and because I was a lot younger when I was a therapist, most were older than me, but it was like they were my children in a certain sort of metaphorical way. It's like spiritually, emotionally, like I adopted them. I wanted them to grow. I loved to be with them. And still, I love to be with people. I love to help people, be useful, listen, to care. But now I saw it when I was traveling, how much I could just enjoy my own company, enjoy my own thoughts, enjoy reflecting on my life, enjoy being with myself as I was in nature, just enjoy looking at the beautiful scenes around me, the beautiful things, the marvelous creation of our world, the sun, the moon, mountains, beautiful buildings, even churches that I saw sometimes when I was out wandering in the hills. Just so many things that were so gorgeous, wild horses that I saw. And then I think of all these years of travel, I can reflect on my life. Sometimes when I'm out traveling and I'm alone, I can reflect on somewhere I was visiting 5 years past, or some relationship I had, some conversation I had with some person, maybe who I only knew for an hour. And how grateful I am that I can do that. So I was telling this friend of mine how I like to be alone, how much I love it, and how much I get pleasure out of it. Not in a dissociative way, because I do know people. I've seen people who like to be alone most of the time, but they don't have a deep relationship with themselves on the inside. Instead, they like to be alone really as escape. They don't have much of a self-reflective relationship, or very minimally so. They just are hiding from the world, hiding from life, hiding from difficulties, hiding from problems, hiding from anxiety, hiding from feelings. Often their aloneness involves escapism, alcohol, drugs, different addictive ways to push down their feelings so they don't have to think about themselves. Even people who use forms of meditation from this to be with themselves, but to not be with themselves, to keep the walls, the inner walls of themselves intact. And for me, I don't feel that. I just feel so joyous and alive so often when I'm out in the world and alone. And I'm so grateful for that, because I've also seen many people who they don't like to be alone in escapism, in a split-off, dissociated way, but they also can't be alone in a connected, joyous way. And all they are left with is a desperate, and I would even call it addictive, need to be with somebody else all the time. Many people, if they can't find an actual person, they're finding it on the television, in movies, constantly being entertained by other people's lives, other people's personas, characters, other people's facades, other people's interactions and dramas, and they're just kind of lost or dissociated in it. In video games, things like that. Even video games can become the fantasy. Pornography, things like this, these fantasy scenarios that allow people to not feel so alone when they are alone. And then I think of my parents, who could never be alone. They always needed to be in a relationship, always needed to be in some sort of second-tier romance where there was so much that was fake and artificial. They weren't being their own real selves. They couldn't be alone with themselves because they didn't have their own self, so they found someone they could be in an external relationship with who also didn't have a real self and also couldn't be alone and had a desperate need to connect with someone else to fill up the despair and loneliness and meaninglessness of their lives. And so that's the truth of my parents. That's so common in our world, people who literally cannot be alone. So I was thinking about this, and when I was talking about it with my friend, he said that he'd read it somewhere. I don't have the quotation, but he said, I think it's true. He said, to be alone with yourself, to be able to be alone with yourself in a connected way, not in an escapist way, but in a connected way, that is a hallmark of maturity. And in a way I felt maybe a little embarrassed hearing that, ooh, maturity. But then I thought, well, I knew for so many years of my life, certainly in my teen years, even into my early 20s, that word immaturity. It was a painful word for me because it applied to me. I knew I was immature. And not in an insulting way, you're immature. Teachers told me that. Sometimes kids teased me and teased other people, you're just an immature person. I got called that in my family system too. You're immature. It was an insult. But it wasn't being said in an objective way, a true way. So when I say I was immature, it's like I really mean that in an objective way. The true self of me was stunted. It couldn't develop further in my family system, in my greater society. It wasn't allowed to develop. And somehow, through my healing process, really connecting with what happened to me, the truth of my painful history, my traumas, and really working out so many of them, taking profound and massive steps to work them out, to get out of my family system, to get away from those traumatizing people, I have been allowed to do what my soul always wanted to do, which was to mature. And in maturing, me came out. me, deep, true me, the me that was always there, the me that everybody has a deep, true self, just most people are so split off from it and buried that they never get to connect to it, and so they all stay in a state of immaturity. The irony being all those people who were calling me immature back then, they were all immature. Most of them were more immature than I was, and I didn't realize it because they just looked fancy in the eyes of society. But now, connecting with real me, I've gotten real perspective, and I found that what I have so much of the time, most of the time, is when I go walking, when I'm alone, when I'm out in the world, wherever I am, even right now, what drives me, what allows me to speak my mind is I am connected with me. And I am in a relationship with me. So being alone is not a bad thing. It's mostly a wonderful thing. Yes, again, I love being with people. Healthy people, connected people, people who are growing and learning and inspiring me in return. But I do find again, I feel so fortunate that I've gotten to a place in my life where I can be alone with me.